The night market pulsed with a chaotic symphony of sizzling woks, hawkers' calls, and the shuffle of 1,000 feet. And Etienne, nestled behind her small stall draped with hand-knitted sweaters, felt the familiar thrum of anxiety beneath the surface of her practiced smile. 89 pieces each. A price that reflected hours of painstaking work, yet barely enough to cover the ever-mounting expenses of raising 3 growing children. She adjusted the display, her fingers lingering on the soft wool of a baby blue cardigan, imagining Dior snuggled within its warmth. A wave of melancholy washed over her. 6 years. 6 years since she'd last felt the comforting embrace of her family home, replaced now by the biting chill of uncertainty. 2 women, their faces painted with the garish hues of the market's neon lights, paused before her stall. And Etienne schooled her expression into one of welcoming neutrality. Beautiful sweaters, one of them breathed, her fingers tracing the intricate cable knit of a cream-colored pullover. Such fine work. How much? 89 pieces each, and Etienne repeated, her voice calm and steady, though her heart thumped a nervous rhythm against her ribs. Every sale was a small victory. So reasonable, the other woman exclaimed, picking up a scarlet sweater and holding it against herself. Look, Mei-Lin, this would suit you perfectly. Mei-Lin preened, turning this way and that. You think so? It's lovely. Much nicer than those mass-produced things you find in the department stores. She glanced back at Etienne, a flicker of curiosity in her eyes. You're very talented. Did you learn to knit from your mother? Etienne's smile faltered, a shadow passing across her face. No, she answered, her voice barely above a whisper. The word hung in the air, heavy with unspoken history. She busied herself rearranging a stack of beanies, the wool scratching against her fingertips, a grounding sensation against the rising tide of unease. Suddenly, a small voice piped up, Mommy, look. I found it. Dior, her face flushed with excitement, darted into the stall, clutching a miniature version of the scarlet sweater Mei-Lin held. Etienne's breath hitched. Her carefully constructed wall of anonymity crumbled. You have a child. Mei-Lin's voice was laced with a newfound suspicion. Her gaze sharpened, taking in Etienne's worn clothes, the dark circles under her eyes, the faint lines etched around her mouth. Before Etienne could respond, a knowing smirk spread across Mei-Lin's face. Oh, wait, she drawled, turning to her companion. Isn't this the one who, her words trailed off, replaced by a meaningful look. Etienne felt a cold dread seep into her bones. The whispers. The rumors. They followed her like a persistent shadow, threatening to engulf her and her children in their suffocating darkness. You were sent by Grandpa, Dior declared proudly, oblivious to the sudden shift in atmosphere. He said you needed to sell all the sweaters. The 2 women exchanged a look of blatant disgust. So it's true then, Mei-Lin muttered under her breath. Selling sweaters, how pathetic. Etienne's hands clenched into fists, her nails digging into her palms. She wanted to scream, to defend herself, to shield Dior from their venomous stares. But what could she say? How could she explain the tangled web of circumstances that had led her to this point? You sleep with everyone and you are not afraid of getting sick, the first woman spat, her voice dripping with contempt, echoing the cruelest of the rumors that circulated about her. Etienne's stomach lurched. She snatched Dior's hand, her heart pounding against her ribs like a trapped bird. We're leaving, she said, her voice trembling slightly. She couldn't bear it anymore. The pity, the judgment, the suffocating weight of their unspoken accusations. As she hurried away, pulling Dior along behind her, Etienne felt a wave of despair wash over her. How long could she keep running? How long could she protect her children from the truth? Days later, the echoes of the night market still resonated in Etienne's mind. The casual cruelty, the swift judgment. It was a stark reminder of the precariousness of her situation. She found herself pacing the small, sparsely furnished apartment, the rhythmic squeak of her worn slippers a counterpoint to the chaotic thoughts swirling in her head. The children, thankfully, were absorbed in their own world, Joju meticulously drawing with crayons, Joha humming a tuneless melody while building a precarious tower of blocks, and Joer, ever the performer, narrating an elaborate story involving a princess and a dragon. Their innocent obliviousness was a balm to her frayed nerves. They were her reason, her strength, her everything. And for them, she would endure anything. Across town, in the sterile, antiseptic environment of a private hospital room, Liu Beichen sat beside Anife, his hand resting lightly on hers. Anife, pale and fragile after a minor procedure, leaned against him, her eyes closed. Liu Beichen studied her face, the delicate curve of her cheek, the long, dark lashes resting against her skin. His expression was unreadable, a carefully constructed mask of concern. His thoughts, however, were far from the hospital room. They were tangled in a web of obligations, expectations, and a nagging sense of unease that he couldn't quite place. His family's pressure to solidify the alliance with the Yin family through this marriage was immense. He knew it was the logical, the sensible course of action. Yet, a persistent dissonance gnawed at him, a feeling that something crucial was missing, something he couldn't quite grasp. A nurse entered the room, breaking the silence. "Mr. Liu, the doctor would like a word with you." Liu Beichen excused himself, his mind still preoccupied. He stepped into the hallway, the antiseptic smell stinging his nostrils. The doctor, a man with kind eyes and a reassuringly calm demeanor, greeted him with a gentle smile. Everything went well with the procedure, the doctor assured him. "Miss An is recovering nicely." He paused, his smile fading slightly. "However, there's something else we need to discuss. Something regarding the paternity test." The words hung in the air, heavy with unspoken implications. Liu Beichen felt a jolt of adrenaline course through him. Paternity test. Why? A sudden, inexplicable sense of dread washed over him. He stared at the doctor, his mind racing, searching for answers, for some logical explanation. The doctor's next words shattered his carefully constructed world. "The results are in, Mr. Liu. And they indicate you are not the father." The faint scent of jasmine tea, a ghost of the afternoon's offering, lingered in the air, a stark contrast to the bitter taste rising in Etienne's throat. The old family home, with its familiar creaking floorboards and faded silk tapestries, had become a cage. Just hours before, she'd sat on the worn sofa, her hands calloused from knitting, a chasm of 6 years separating her from the laughter and whispers that once filled these rooms. Now, the laughter was gone, replaced by a chilling stillness punctuated by the occasional sharp intake of breath. Her father, Nguo-yang, stood before her, his face etched with a weariness that went beyond his years. The lines around his eyes, once crinkled with amusement, were now deep furrows of disappointment. And Etienne watched him, her heart a leaden weight in her chest. She'd rehearsed this reunion countless times in her mind, picturing tears, apologies, maybe even a tentative embrace. The reality, however, was a cold, sterile tableau. "Tian," he began, his voice devoid of the warmth she remembered. Each syllable felt like a small stone chipping away at the fragile hope she'd clung to. "You are going to study abroad starting tomorrow." The words hung in the air, heavy with unspoken accusations. Study abroad. A gilded cage, a polite exile. And Etienne's fingers tightened around the worn edges of her knitted bag. She'd envisioned a difficult homecoming, but this felt like a final severing. Did he even want to know why I left? Does he care about what happened these past 6 years? The questions clawed at her throat, unspoken. Anife, her cousin, stood just behind their father, her arms crossed, a smirk playing on her lips. Triumphant. and Etienne could practically feel the waves of animosity radiating from her. 6 years ago, Ife had envied her, her carefree spirit, her effortless charm. Now, she reveled in her downfall. After all this, Ife's voice dripped with disdain, "You still favor her so much, father." Each word was a carefully aimed dart, poisoned with resentment. "She's always seen me as a threat," and Etienne thought, the realization a cold knot in her stomach. "Even now, when I'm at my lowest." And Guoyang sighed, rubbing his temples as if warding off a headache. The silence stretched, thick with unspoken recriminations. And Etienne wanted to scream, to defend herself, to explain the tangled web of circumstances that had led her back to this house, this suffocating atmosphere. But the words wouldn't come. What could she say? That she'd been naive, foolish, betrayed. That she carried a secret that would shatter the fragile peace of their family. The weight of her unspoken truth, the 3 small lives she'd brought into the world, their father's identity, a carefully guarded secret pressed down on her, stealing her breath. My children, she thought, a sudden surge of protectiveness flooding through her. I have to protect them from this. She lifted her chin, meeting her father's gaze. I understand, she said, her voice surprisingly steady. Internally, she was a maelstrom of conflicting emotions. Relief that she could escape this house, fear of the unknown future, a desperate longing for the simple comfort of her children's laughter. Later that night, the moon cast long, skeletal shadows across the floor of her small, rented apartment. The air was thick with the scent of baby powder and the faint, milky aroma of warmed formula. Her triplets, Jior, Jiojue, and Jioha, slept soundly in their cribs, their small chests rising and falling in a gentle rhythm. And Etienne sat on the edge of her bed, the landlord's cheap mattress digging into her back. She ran a hand through her hair, the exhaustion of the day finally catching up with her. The encounter with her family had left her drained, emotionally raw. She closed her eyes, picturing Liu Beichen's face. The man who had promised her the world, then vanished without a trace. The man who, unknowingly, was the father of her children. He's going to marry Ife, the thought pierced her like a shard of glass. She hadn't dared to imagine what his reaction would be if he ever discovered the truth. Would he accept them? Or would he turn his back, just like everyone else? The fear coiled in her stomach, a cold, hard knot. She looked at her children, their innocent faces bathed in the soft moonlight. She wouldn't let them suffer the consequences of her past. She would protect them, no matter the cost. Going abroad, it was a chance to start over, to build a new life, far away from the judging eyes of her family and the tangled web of lies that had ensnared her. A single tear traced a path down her cheek. It wasn't the life she'd envisioned, but it was the life she had to create. For her children. For herself. The faintest glimmer of hope flickered in the darkness, a fragile ember against the overwhelming odds. She would survive this. She had to. The pale morning light filtered through the gaps in the curtains, casting long, skeletal shadows across the sparsely furnished room. And Etienne woke with a start, the phantom weight of a small hand still imprinted on her arm. Jior, her eldest, always sought her out in the night, a silent plea for comfort in the unfamiliar surroundings. Etienne ran a hand over the worn cotton sheet, the coolness a stark contrast to the lingering warmth of her daughter's touch. 6 years. 6 years she had built a fortress around her heart, brick by agonizing brick. Now, back in the lion's den, those walls felt brittle, threatening to crumble under the weight of the family's disapproval. She could hear the muted clanging of pots from the kitchen downstairs, the familiar symphony of a household waking. It was a sound she had almost forgotten, a sound that both soothed and unsettled her. A deep sigh escaped her lips, a wisp of the weariness that clung to her like a second skin. The aroma of frying dough and scallions wafted up the stairs, a bittersweet reminder of a childhood she could no longer reclaim. As she descended, the familiar creak of the wooden steps echoed the trepidation in her heart. In the kitchen, Anife stood, a picture of domestic perfection in a pristine apron, her long hair cascading down her back like a silken waterfall. The sight sent a jolt of unease through Etienne. Ife's presence was always a performance, every gesture calculated, every word a veiled barb. "Oh, you're awake," Ife said, her voice saccharine sweet, the underlying frost barely concealed. "I thought you might sleep the day away, after your dramatic entrance yesterday." The spatula in her hand flipped a golden pancake with practiced ease, the rhythmic sizzle a counterpoint to the simmering tension in the room. Etienne's jaw tightened, the urge to retaliate a bitter taste on her tongue. But she swallowed it down. This wasn't the time for petty squabbles. Her children were upstairs, their innocent sleep a fragile shield against the storm brewing below. "I have work to do," she replied, her voice carefully neutral, each word a measured step on a tightrope. She moved towards the cupboard, her hand hovering over a chipped teacup. Even the simple act of choosing a cup felt like navigating a minefield. "Work?" Ife's laughter, sharp and brittle, echoed through the kitchen. "Selling those homespun creations of yours? Hardly befitting an, is it?" The spatula clattered against the pan, the sudden noise making Etienne flinch. She closed her eyes for a fleeting moment, willing herself to remain calm. "I'm providing for my children," she said, her voice low but steady. The words hung in the air, a quiet defiance against Ife's thinly veiled contempt. "Children?" Ife turned, her eyes narrowing, a glint of something dangerous flickering within their depths. "Speaking of children, those triplets of yours, they bear a striking resemblance to someone I know." The words were laced with insinuation, a poisonous dart aimed at the heart of Etienne's carefully constructed defenses. Etienne felt a cold dread seep into her bones. Ife was circling, like a predator sensing weakness. She had to steer the conversation away, protect her children from the venom of their family's scrutiny. "They look like their father," she responded, her voice a strained whisper. The lie tasted like ash in her mouth. Ife's smile widened, a predatory curve that sent a shiver down Etienne's spine. "Indeed. Perhaps you should tell us who their father is. Unless, of course, there's a reason you'd rather keep it a secret." Before Etienne could respond, a heavy tread echoed from the hallway. Grandpa entered the kitchen, his face etched with disapproval, his gaze fixed on Etienne. "Ife tells me you're back," he said, his voice gruff, devoid of warmth. "After all these years, you return with baggage." He gestured dismissively towards the stairs, his meaning clear. Etienne's heart clenched. The weight of his judgment pressed down on her, suffocating her. She opened her mouth to speak, but the words caught in her throat. What could she say? How could she explain the tangled web of choices that had led her back to this place? "Grandpa," Ife interjected, her voice smooth and conciliatory, a stark contrast to the venom she had spewed moments before. "Perhaps we can discuss this later. Bacon will be here soon, and it wouldn't be appropriate." "Bacon?" Grandpa N's brow furrowed. "Why is he coming here?" A triumphant glint flashed in Ife's eyes. "He wants to introduce me to his family officially. As his future wife, the eldest daughter of the family." "Grandpa," Etienne finally managed to speak, her voice barely a whisper, "only I can sit on the position of the eldest lady of the family." The words hung in the air, a challenge thrown into the heart of the storm. The silence that followed was thick with tension, the air crackling with unspoken accusations and simmering resentments. The game had begun. And Etienne knew, with a chilling certainty, that she had just played her first card. The fluorescent lights of the hospital corridor hummed, a sterile, unsettling soundtrack to Etienne's rising panic. The antiseptic smell, usually a comfort, now choked her, clinging to the back of her throat like a premonition. Gior, her precious, usually vibrant Gior, lay limp in her arms, small body radiating an unnatural heat. Just moments ago, they had been walking home from the market, Joer chattering excitedly about the brightly colored balloons she'd seen. Then, the sudden stumble, the glassy stare, the terrifying rigidity of her tiny limbs. And Etienne's heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic drumbeat against the silence of her fear. 6 years she had guarded them, shielded them from the storm that had ripped her life apart. 6 years she had built a fragile fortress of normalcy, selling her hand-knitted sweaters, whispering lullabies, and weaving tales of a father their innocent eyes had never known. And now, this terrifying unknown that threatened to shatter everything. The nurse, her face etched with professional concern, ushered them into a small examination room. The sterile white walls seemed to close in on Etienne, amplifying the frantic rhythm of her pulse. She placed Joer gently on the crisp, paper-covered examination table, her hand trembling as she smoothed back the damp tendrils of hair clinging to her daughter's forehead. The child's breathing was shallow, punctuated by small, whimpering gasps. Each one was a tiny dagger twisting in Etienne's gut. She had faced so much, endured so much, but nothing compared to the raw, visceral terror of seeing her child suffer. "Doctor, what's wrong with the child?" Etienne's voice was barely a whisper, strained with an anxiety she couldn't quite contain. The words felt inadequate, hollow against the weight of her fear. The doctor, a young woman with kind eyes and a reassuring smile, approached the examination table. Her touch was gentle as she examined Joer, her brow furrowing slightly as she listened to the child's chest. "She has a fever and is convulsing," the doctor said, her voice calm yet laced with an urgency Etienne couldn't ignore. "We need to run some tests to determine the cause." Convulsing. The word echoed in Etienne's mind, a dark omen in the sterile silence. She swallowed hard, the knot in her throat tightening. Convulsing. What did it mean? What was happening to her daughter? Her thoughts raced, a chaotic jumble of worst-case scenarios. Was it something she had done? Something she had failed to do? Had she not been careful enough? Had her past, the past she had so desperately tried to bury, finally caught up with her, claiming her innocent child as its victim? The doctor's voice, though calm and professional, was a blur in Etienne's ears. Blood tests. Urine samples. For fluids. The words swirled around her, meaningless in the face of her overwhelming fear. She watched, numb, as the nurse inserted a needle into Joer's tiny arm, the child's whimper a sharp, agonizing sound that pierced through the fog of Etienne's panic. Time stretched and compressed, each second an eternity, each minute a fleeting breath. The hospital, with its hushed whispers and the rhythmic beeping of machines, became a surreal landscape, a backdrop to her internal turmoil. She paced the length of the small waiting room, her steps restless and uneven. The chipped paint on the walls, the faded posters promoting child health, the worn magazines on the table, every detail was magnified, etched into her consciousness with the sharp clarity of fear. She thought of her other 2 children, Jojue and Joha, waiting for her at home, oblivious to the storm raging around them. They were so young, so dependent on her. What would happen to them if something happened to Joer? The thought was a physical blow, knocking the air from her lungs. She closed her eyes, trying to conjure the image of their father, the man whose features were etched in her memory, yet remained a stranger to her children. Liu Beichen. The name tasted like ash in her mouth. He was a ghost in their lives, a shadow lurking just beyond the edges of their reality. A powerful man, entangled with her cousin, Anife. A man who, if he only knew the truth, but no. She wouldn't involve him. Not now. Not like this. The secrets of her past were a tangled web, and she wouldn't risk ensnaring her children in its sticky threads. She had borne the burden alone for 6 years, and she would continue to do so. She had to. For them. The doctor emerged from the examination room, her expression grave. The fever is quite high, she said, her voice laced with concern. We've administered medication, but we need to monitor her closely. We suspect it might be meningitis, but we're still waiting for the test results. Meningitis. Another word, another dark shadow looming over her. Etienne felt a wave of nausea wash over her. She gripped the back of a chair, her knuckles white, fighting the urge to collapse. She had to be strong. She had to be the rock for her children, the shield against the storms of life. But the weight of it all, the years of secrecy, the fear, the uncertainty, threatened to crush her. She looked towards the closed door of the examination room, where her daughter lay, small and vulnerable, fighting an unseen enemy. A fierce protectiveness surged through her, a primal instinct to shield her child from harm. She would do anything, anything to protect her children. Even if it meant facing the ghosts of her past, even if it meant confronting the man who held the key to their future, the man who was both the source of her greatest joy and her deepest sorrow. Lou Bachin. The fluorescent lights of the hospital waiting room hummed, a sterile counterpoint to the anxious murmurs that drifted through the air. Etienne sat rigidly on the plastic chair, the cheap vinyl sticking uncomfortably to her skin. 6 years. 6 years she had been absent, a ghost hovering at the edges of her family's life. And now, summoned back by a whisper from the past, she felt the full weight of those years pressing down on her, suffocating her with a mixture of guilt and apprehension. Her hands, roughened by years of manual labor, tightened around the worn strap of her bag. Inside, nestled amongst balls of yarn and half-finished sweaters, lay the photographs, her only tangible connection to the life she had built in the shadows. 3 small faces, each a miniature echo of she couldn't even bear to complete the thought. The doctor's words still rang in her ears, the old man has been in a coma for 6 years and finally woke up. He named you to see you. Her grandfather. The one person who had always shown her a sliver of warmth in that cold, imposing house. What could he possibly want after all this time? Did he know? The question clawed at her throat, a knot of fear tightening with each shallow breath. The antiseptic smell of the hospital, so alien to the earthy scent of the countryside where she had made her home, intensified her unease. A nurse bustled past, the crisp rustle of her starched uniform a stark contrast to the soft whisper of Etienne's hand-knitted sweater. She felt a sudden, desperate urge to flee, to disappear back into the anonymity of her small village, back to the familiar comfort of her children's laughter. But something held her back, an invisible thread of duty, of unspoken obligation, tugging her towards the closed door of her grandfather's room. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of illness and disinfectant. Her grandfather lay frail and diminished on the crisp white sheets, his face etched with the passage of time and the lingering shadows of his long sleep. Machines beeped rhythmically, a mechanical heartbeat against the fragile rhythm of his own. And Etienne's heart ached with a strange mixture of sorrow and relief. He was alive. That, at least, was something. She approached the bed hesitantly, her footsteps muffled by the sterile floor. His eyes, once sharp and commanding, flickered open, clouding with confusion before focusing on her face. A faint smile touched his lips. Etienne, he whispered, his voice raspy and weak, yet carrying the same weight of authority she remembered. Grandfather, she responded, her voice trembling slightly. Her mind raced, searching for the right words, the appropriate mask to wear in front of this man who represented everything she had left behind. She had practiced this moment countless times in her head, imagining the accusations, the recriminations. But his gaze held none of that. Instead, there was a strange vulnerability, a plea for understanding that disarmed her completely. He reached out a withered hand, his fingers surprisingly strong as they gripped hers. You came back, he breathed, his voice laced with a weariness that went beyond physical ailment. Etienne swallowed hard, the lump in her throat constricting her airway. Yes, grandfather, she managed, her voice barely a whisper. She wanted to ask him so many things, to pour out the torrent of emotions that had been dammed up for so long. But the words wouldn't come. The years of silence had built a wall between them, a wall she wasn't sure she could breach. Outside the room, the hushed whispers intensified. Anife's voice, sharp and edged with impatience, cut through the hushed murmurs. How much longer? Grandfather needs his rest. Etienne stiffened, her hand instinctively tightening around her grandfather's. The familiar wave of resentment, of bitter rivalry, washed over her. Anife, the golden child, the one who had always basked in the family's favor. The one who was now engaged to the thought trailed off, a sharp stab of pain piercing through her carefully constructed defenses. The door opened, and Anife swept into the room, her elegant figure radiating an aura of controlled displeasure. Her gaze flicked over Etienne, a mixture of disdain and suspicion in her eyes. "What are you doing here?" she demanded, her voice laced with ice. "You shouldn't be tiring grandfather." "Ife," the old man rasped, his voice surprisingly firm. "Leave us." Anife's face hardened, a mask of disbelief replacing her carefully cultivated composure. "But grandfather," I said, "leave us," he repeated, his voice laced with a steel she rarely heard. Anife hesitated, her eyes darting between Etienne and her grandfather, before finally retreating with a curt nod. The door clicked shut behind her, leaving a heavy silence in its wake. Etienne felt the weight of her grandfather's gaze on her, heavy with unspoken questions. Later, in the sterile quiet of the hospital corridor, Lou Bachan's voice resonated with an almost chilling finality. "I order you. I must marry the eldest daughter of the Yin family." His words, meant for his father, echoing in her mind as she stared unblinking at the bustling city. That same city she ran from, but fate seems to conspire for the two worlds to collide, to reveal the truth buried beneath the layers of secrets, of her, of the three little faces that resembled him, the man in front of her. The fluorescent lights of the hospital waiting room hummed a monotonous tune, a stark counterpoint to the anxious flutter in Etienne's chest. The sterile scent of antiseptic mingled with the faint, lingering aroma of the hand-knitted sweaters bundled in her arms. Each stitch held the warmth of her hands, the silent whisper of countless hours spent weaving a future for her children. A future she now had to fight for, a future entangled with the man whose name she hadn't dared to utter in 6 long years. Lou Bachan. He sat across the room, a stark figure against the pale walls, his profile sharp and unyielding. Anife, her cousin, perched beside him like a brightly plumaged bird, her voice a constant stream of concerned whispers. Etienne watched them, a knot tightening in her stomach. 6 years. 6 years of silence and distance, and here he was, a tangible reminder of a past she had tried so desperately to bury. She took a deep breath, the cool air a momentary reprieve from the suffocating weight of the past. Her children. Joer, Jojue, Joha. Their faces, etched with innocent curiosity, flashed before her eyes, fueling her resolve. She had to do this. For them. "Come and take a look at the sweaters I knitted myself," she said, her voice surprisingly steady, a thin veneer over the tremor of her nerves. Her steps echoed in the hushed room, each one a measured beat against the frantic rhythm of her heart. Lou Bachan turned, his gaze sweeping over her, a flicker of something unreadable in his eyes. Recognition? Confusion? Etienne couldn't decipher it. His expression remained impassive, the mask of a man accustomed to concealing his thoughts. Yet, something shifted in his posture, a subtle stiffening, as if her presence had jolted a dormant memory. "I think I've seen this woman somewhere," he murmured, his voice low, a ripple in the stillness of the waiting room. Anife's laughter, brittle and sharp, cut through the air. "Bachan, you're imagining things. She's just one of those vendors who try to sell things to patients' families. Probably saw her outside the hospital." Etienne felt a sting of humiliation, a bitter taste rising in her throat. A vendor. Yes, that was her current reality, a far cry from the shared dreams and whispered promises of their past. But she wouldn't let Anife's dismissiveness deter her. Not today. These are high-quality wool, she said, forcing a smile, her fingers tracing the intricate patterns of the sweaters. Perfect for the upcoming winter. I can offer you a discount. Liu Beichen's gaze lingered on her hands, his eyes narrowing slightly. He reached out, his fingers brushing against the soft yarn, a fleeting touch that sent a jolt of electricity through Etienne. The past, buried beneath layers of pain and regret, surged to the surface, a tidal wave threatening to engulf her. His touch, even so brief, evoked a cascade of memories. Their first meeting, the hesitant smiles, the shared laughter under the summer sky. The stolen moments, the whispered confessions, the promises of a future they never reached. A future stolen by circumstances, by secrets and misunderstandings. He looked up, his gaze meeting hers, a flicker of recognition finally breaking through the carefully constructed facade. And Etienne's breath hitched, the air thick with unspoken words, with the weight of their shared history. Inside, a storm raged. Fear, anger, and a desperate hope warred within her. What did he remember? How much did he know? The questions clawed at her, threatening to shatter the fragile composure she had so painstakingly built. These are well made, he said, his voice a low rumble, his eyes searching hers. How much? The question, so mundane, so ordinary, hung in the air, charged with an unspoken tension. And Etienne named a price, her voice barely a whisper. He paid without a word, his fingers brushing hers again as he took the sweaters. Another jolt, another wave of memories. The warmth of his hand, the strength of his embrace. The whispered promises and Ife's eyes narrowed, suspicion clouding her features. She opened her mouth to speak, but Liu Beichen cut her off. I'll be back, he said, his voice carrying an unfamiliar edge, his gaze fixed on Etienne. He turned and walked away, his figure disappearing down the sterile corridor. Etienne stood there, the weight of his gaze still pressing on her, the echoes of their unspoken words reverberating in the silence. The sweaters felt heavy in her arms, no longer symbols of hope, but reminders of a past she could no longer escape. The encounter, so brief, so charged, had shifted the balance, setting in motion a chain of events she couldn't control. The game had begun. She glanced at Anife, whose face was contorted in a mask of disbelief and burgeoning anger. The silent battle had commenced, the stakes higher than either of them could imagine. And somewhere in the heart of this unfolding drama, 3 innocent children slept, oblivious to the storm gathering around them, their destinies intertwined with the secrets of their parents' past. The aroma of sizzling garlic and ginger clung to the air, a sharp contrast to the hushed elegance of the restaurant. Etienne watched as Jior, Jiojue, and Jioha, her triplets, attacked their plates of noodles with the ferocious hunger only 6-year-olds could possess. A faint smile played on her lips, a fragile shield against the anxieties swirling within. This small, stolen moment of normalcy, the simple joy of watching her children eat, was a precious commodity. It offered a temporary reprieve from the gnawing uncertainty that had become her constant companion. Each slurp, each giggle, was a tiny victory against the shadows of her past. How long can I keep this up, she wondered, her gaze drifting towards the restaurant's entrance. The opulent decor, the hushed conversations of the other diners, all served as a stark reminder of the world she had once inhabited, a world she had abandoned 6 years ago, a world she was now tentatively re-entering. She felt like an imposter, a street vendor masquerading in a palace. Across the restaurant, in a secluded private dining room, Liu Beichen dismissed the hospital's chauffeur with a curt nod. The sterile scent of antiseptic still clung to him, a ghostly reminder of the afternoon spent navigating the labyrinthine corridors of the medical wing. His father's health was deteriorating, a slow, agonizing decline that mirrored the crumbling foundations of his own life. He felt a familiar tightness in his chest, a premonition of the storm brewing on the horizon. Anife will not be pleased, he thought, the image of his fiancée's sharp features and even sharper tongue flashing through his mind. He had promised to join her for dinner, a symbolic gesture of solidarity, a public display of their unbreakable bond. But duty, as it always did, had intervened. Meanwhile, Joer, ever the adventurous one, slid from his chair. "Mommy, I need to explore," he declared, his eyes twinkling with mischief. Etienne sighed, a mixture of amusement and exasperation swirling within her. "Stay within sight, Joer," she cautioned, her voice barely a whisper. He nodded, already halfway across the room, his small figure weaving between tables with the agility of a seasoned spy. Jojue and Joha, ever the obedient ones, continued their assault on the noodles, their chopsticks clicking rhythmically against their bowls. Joer's exploration led him down a long, carpeted hallway. At the end, a heavy oak door stood slightly ajar, spilling soft light into the corridor. Intrigued, he pushed it open, revealing a lavishly decorated dining room. Liu Beichen sat alone at a large, round table, his back to the door, the flickering candlelight casting long shadows across his face. Joer froze, recognizing the man from the night market, the one who had bought his mommy's sweaters. "Handsome uncle," he exclaimed, his voice echoing in the otherwise silent room. Liu Beichen turned, startled. He looked down at the small boy, his expression softening. A flicker of something akin to recognition, fleeting and uncertain, crossed his features. Before he could speak, however, a sharp voice cut through the air. "Joer! What are you doing here?" Anife strode into the room, her face a mask of displeasure. She grabbed Joer's hand, her grip tight. "This is a private dining room," she hissed, her eyes narrowed slits of suspicion. Her gaze shifted to Liu Beichen, then back to Joer. A cold dread began to seep into her bones. The child's features, the shape of his eyes, the curve of his lips, it was like looking at a miniature version of no, it couldn't be. She dismissed the thought as absurd, a product of her overactive imagination. "Handsome uncle bought mommy's sweaters," Joer announced proudly, oblivious to the tension crackling in the air. Etienne, hearing the commotion, rushed into the room. Her heart sank when she saw Anife, her cousin, her nemesis. Of all the people, she thought, her mind racing. Beside Anife stood Liu Beichen, his expression unreadable. The air thickened with unspoken words, with years of resentment and hidden truths. "Etienne," Anife said, her voice dripping with venom. "What a surprise. I didn't realize you frequented establishments like this." Etienne forced a smile. "Just a treat for the children," she replied, her voice steady despite the turmoil within. "Isn't this handsome uncle the one I met at the night market?" Jojue piped up, having followed his brother into the room, Joha trailing close behind. The color drained from Anife's face. The pieces clicked into place, forming a horrifying picture. The night market, the sweaters, the children. She turned to Liu Beichen, her eyes blazing with fury. "This Liu Beichen are you?" Liu Beichen remained silent, his gaze fixed on Etienne. The 6 years melted away, revealing the ghost of a memory, a night of passion, a whispered promise. He saw it now, the undeniable resemblance between himself and the children. The truth, so carefully buried, clawed its way to the surface. "This Liu, are you blind?" "I like Anife," Joha declared, his small voice cutting through the charged silence. He pointed at Liu Beichen, his expression one of utter confusion. "You're supposed to like mommy." The silence that followed was deafening. Etienne closed her eyes, bracing herself for the inevitable explosion. The carefully constructed walls she had built around her heart, around her secrets, began to crumble. The truth, like a wild beast, had been unleashed. And there was no stopping it now. The opulent chandeliers cast a shimmering glow on the pristine white tablecloth, reflecting in the polished silverware and crystal glasses. The aroma of expensive wine and delicately seasoned dishes hung heavy in the air, a stark contrast to the tension simmering beneath the surface of the seemingly jovial family dinner. And Etienne felt the weight of every gaze, every whispered word, pressing down on her like a suffocating blanket. Her cousin, Anife, sat across from her, her perfectly sculpted face a mask of forced composure, her eyes glinting with a mixture of disbelief and barely concealed fury. "So, Etienne," Anife began, her voice dripping with saccharine sweetness that did little to mask the venom beneath, "you've been quite busy these past 6 years. Selling handmade sweaters, you say?" Each word was a carefully aimed dart, designed to pierce the fragile facade Etienne had erected around herself. Etienne's fingers tightened around her wine glass, the cool crystal a stark contrast to the burning anger rising in her chest. "She thinks she's belittling me," Etienne thought, her jaw clenching. "She thinks a little honest work is beneath her." But a lifetime of practiced restraint kept her expression carefully neutral. "It's honest work," Etienne replied, her voice level. "It allows me to provide for my family." The word hung in the air, a loaded confession that only deepened the confusion swirling in the eyes of her family. Anife's laughter, brittle and sharp, echoed through the room. "Provide? With sweaters? My dear cousin, you have a strange definition of providing. Especially considering," she paused, letting the implication hang heavy in the air, her eyes flicking towards Liu Beichen, whose impassive face betrayed nothing of his inner turmoil. "She's enjoying this," Etienne realized, a flicker of despair threatening to overwhelm her. "She's reveling in my discomfort." But the thought of her children, their innocent faces, steeled her resolve. She wouldn't break. Not in front of them, not in front of this family that had never truly understood her. "Especially considering what?" Etienne prompted, her voice steady. The air in the room crackled with unspoken accusations. The in-family elders exchanged nervous glances, their faces a mixture of bewilderment and growing disapproval. Etienne could practically hear their thoughts. "What disgrace has this prodigal daughter brought upon us now?" "Especially considering," Anife continued, her voice laced with triumph, "that Beichen has been more than generous in supporting your lifestyle." The words landed like a bombshell, shattering the fragile peace. Gasps rippled around the table. Liu Beichen's eyes finally met Etienne's, a flicker of something unreadable in their depths. Etienne's heart pounded against her ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. "She knows," Etienne thought, a wave of dizziness washing over her. "But how?" "I believe there's a misunderstanding," Etienne said, her voice barely above a whisper. The lie tasted like ash in her mouth. "Misunderstanding?" Anife scoffed. "Don't play coy, Etienne. Everyone knows about your arrangement with Beichen." Etienne's gaze hardened. The time for pretense was over. "There is no arrangement," she stated, her voice gaining strength. "The period of fake marriage with you is 1 year." The silence that followed was absolute. Every eye in the room was fixed on her, a mixture of shock and disbelief etched on their faces. Liu Beichen shifted in his seat, his expression unreadable. The in-family patriarch, his face a mask of thunder, slammed his hand on the table. "Explain yourself, Etienne. What is the meaning of this?" Etienne drew a deep breath, the air heavy with the scent of impending storm. "It means," she began, her voice resonating with a newfound authority, "that Liu Beichen and I were married 6 years ago." The words hung in the air, heavy and undeniable. The room erupted in a cacophony of gasps and exclamations. Anife's face contorted with rage. "Married? You? To Beichen? That's absurd. I haven't even had a boyfriend yet, let alone a ring like this." She gestured wildly at the glittering diamond on her finger, a symbol of her supposed triumph now reduced to a mocking reminder of her ignorance. And Etienne met her gaze, her own eyes blazing with a fire that had been banked for far too long. "It's true. We were married. And," she paused, her voice catching in her throat, "we have 3 children." The silence that followed was even more profound than before. The air crackled with unspoken questions, accusations, and disbelief. Liu Beichen's face was pale, his eyes fixed on an Etienne, a mixture of confusion and dawning comprehension swirling within them. He opened his mouth to speak, then closed it again, as if unsure of what words to use. The patriarch's voice, hoarse with disbelief, broke the silence. "Children? 3 children? With him?" He gestured weakly towards Liu Beichen, who still seemed frozen in place. And Etienne nodded, a single tear tracing a path down her cheek. Anife stared at her, her face a mask of utter devastation. The carefully constructed image of her perfect life, her secure future as Mrs. Liu Beichen, crumbled around her like a house of cards. "It turns out that she is not missing," she whispered, the words barely audible above the ringing in her ears. And Etienne felt a pang of sympathy for her cousin, a fleeting moment of understanding for the pain she was experiencing. But the years of hardship, the struggle to protect her children, the constant fear of discovery, had hardened her heart. She had survived too much to let anyone, not even her own family, dictate her future. As the night wore on, amidst the accusations and recriminations, Etienne laid bare the details of their fake marriage contract, a desperate attempt to secure her children's future. Each word, each revelation, chipped away at the carefully constructed facade of the family's respectability, exposing the raw, vulnerable emotions beneath. The restaurant, once a symbol of their social standing, now felt like a gilded cage, trapping them all in a web of deceit and unspoken truths. And as the night drew to a close, Etienne knew that her life, and the lives of her children, would never be the same. The cheap lock clicked, a sound that echoed the hollowness in Etienne's chest. Stepping inside the cramped apartment, the scent of steamed milk and cheap instant noodles clung to the air, a stark contrast to the opulent fragrance of lilies that permeated the family mansion. Her fingers, roughened by years of hard work, brushed against the worn fabric of her children's sweaters, each stitch a testament to her struggle. 6 years I've built a life outside those gilded cages, a life where love, however fragile, blossomed in the shadows. A faint smile touched her lips as the triplets tumbled towards her, their tiny hands reaching, their babbling voices a melody against the gnawing anxiety that clawed at her throat. Jior, with her bright eyes and mischievous grin, Jiojue, quiet and observant, and Jioha, the smallest, clinging to her leg with the tenacity of a vine. They were her world, the reason she endured the whispers, the disdain, the constant fear of discovery. Later that evening, the family dining room, a stage for their opulent lives, felt colder than the drafty hallway of her apartment. The air crackled with unspoken accusations. Anife's gaze, sharp as shards of ice, followed her every move. "She thinks I've come to steal her prize, her Liu Beichen." The thought twisted in Etienne's gut, a bitter taste rising in her throat. It wasn't Beichen she wanted, it was the stability, the security for her children, a future free from the constant struggle. Etienne, her grandfather's voice, though frail, carried the weight of authority. "We understand you've had a difficult time. But your return it complicates matters." His words, carefully chosen, danced around the unspoken truth, the scandal that simmered beneath the surface. Etienne lowered her gaze, her fingers tracing the rim of her teacup. "Complications? My mere existence is a complication for them." Across the table, Liu Beichen remained silent, his expression unreadable. His eyes, dark and intense, flickered towards her, a fleeting glance that sent a shiver down her spine. She remembered those eyes, the way they had looked at her 6 years ago, filled with a warmth that now seemed like a phantom limb, a memory both precious and painful. "He doesn't recognize me." He doesn't remember. The realization was a sharp pang in her chest, a hollow echo of the love she had once believed in. The charade continued for days, a tense dance of veiled accusations and forced pleasantries. Etienne played her part, the prodigal daughter returned, grateful for the family's generosity. But each interaction chipped away at her resolve. The constant scrutiny, the whispered conversations, the way Liu Beichen seemed to study her, as if trying to decipher a puzzle. One afternoon, she found him standing by the koi pond, his back to her, the lines of his shoulders rigid. "Grandpa, I will fulfill your wish," his voice, low and resonant, carried across the water, "but I must also find the woman from 6 years ago." Etienne froze, her heart pounding against her ribs. "He's looking for me." "But why?" The truth unraveled slowly, painfully, like a festering wound. A chance encounter with a nurse at the local clinic who remembered the triplets' birth, a whispered conversation overheard by an Ife, a confrontation in the sterile white hallway of a hospital. "Those 3 children are not wild children, right? Then who is their father?" An Ife's voice dripped with venom, her eyes gleaming with malicious triumph. Etienne felt a wave of nausea wash over her, the carefully constructed walls she had built around her secret crumbling under the weight of the inevitable. Later that night, Liu Beichen confronted her in the dimly lit library, his face etched with a mixture of confusion and dawning realization. He held a faded photograph in his hand, a picture of her, younger, carefree, her eyes shining with a happiness that now felt like a lifetime ago. "The children, they look like you," his voice was barely a whisper, his gaze fixed on the photograph, then shifting to her, searching her face as if trying to bridge the gap between the past and the present. Etienne's breath caught in her throat. She could see the pieces clicking into place in his mind, the puzzle of her return, the mystery of her children, finally resolving into a shocking, undeniable truth. He took a step closer, his eyes locking with hers, the intensity of his gaze making her tremble. "Their eyes your smile it's," he trailed off, the unspoken words hanging heavy in the air. Etienne closed her eyes, a single tear tracing a path down her cheek. "He knows." The thought was both terrifying and liberating. The charade was over. The truth, raw and exposed, lay between them, a chasm that had to be bridged, a past that had to be confronted. The silence stretched, broken only by the crackling of the fire in the hearth, each flicker of the flames illuminating the stark reality of their intertwined destinies. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the worn floorboards of Etienne's small apartment. Dust motes danced in the golden light, illuminating the carefully stacked piles of hand-knitted sweaters. She smoothed a hand over the soft wool of a baby blue cardigan, the same shade as her youngest son's eyes. A wave of exhaustion, a familiar companion these last 6 years, washed over her. The confrontation with her family had left her drained, the veiled accusations and barely concealed disdain echoing in her ears. Yet, beneath the weariness, a sliver of defiance sparked. She wouldn't let them break her. Not anymore. Her landlord's knock startled her. He usually kept his distance, his interactions limited to collecting the rent. Etienne opened the door, a polite smile masking the anxiety churning in her stomach. He shuffled his feet, avoiding her gaze. "Missin," he began, clearing his throat, "Mr. Liu's grandfather is here to see you." Her heart plummeted. Liu Beichen's grandfather. What could he possibly want? The old man stood behind the landlord, his face an unreadable mask. Etienne stepped aside, inviting them in. The small apartment suddenly felt suffocating. The grandfather settled onto the worn sofa, his eyes scanning the room, lingering on the children's toys scattered on the rug. "Missin," he began, his voice raspy with age, "I believe you have something that belongs to me." Etienne's mind raced. What could he be referring to? Her knitting needles? Her meager possessions? I don't understand," she stammered, her voice barely above a whisper. The old man's gaze sharpened. My great-grandchildren. He stated it as a fact, leaving no room for argument. A chill ran down Etienne's spine. How did he know? Had her family betrayed her? Her silence seemed to confirm his suspicions. They bear a striking resemblance to our family, he continued, his eyes fixed on a photograph of the triplets on the mantelpiece. Joer, Jojue, and Joha, their innocent faces beaming at the camera. Their eyes, their smile, he trailed off, a flicker of something akin to tenderness crossing his hardened features. And Etienne's mind was a whirlwind of confusion and fear. Should she deny it? Confess? What would happen to her children? They are mine, she finally managed, her voice trembling. The old man chuckled, a dry, humorless sound. Don't insult my intelligence, Misson. My grandson, Liu Beichen, has been searching for them for years. The words hit her like a physical blow. Liu Beichen. The name resonated with a painful familiarity, a bittersweet echo of a past she had tried so hard to bury. The memories flooded back, stolen glances, whispered promises, a love that burned bright and then vanished like smoke. She had convinced herself it was a fleeting affair, a mistake. But the truth, stark and undeniable, stared back at her from the old man's unwavering gaze. Across town, in the opulent surroundings of Liu Beichen's home, Anife paced the marble floor, her phone clutched in her hand. She had just received a call from her grandfather, informing her of the shocking discovery. Rage and disbelief warred within her. And Etienne, her supposedly insignificant cousin, the one who had disappeared and returned with nothing but a basket of hand-knitted goods, had somehow managed to entangle herself with Liu Beichen. And borne his children. The thought was unbearable. It threatened to shatter the carefully constructed image of her perfect life, her impending marriage to one of the most eligible bachelors in the city. How could she? Anife muttered, her voice laced with venom. How dare she? Liu Beichen entered the room, his brow furrowed in concern. He had overheard snippets of her conversation. What is it, Ife? What's wrong? Anife whirled around, her eyes blazing. You need to explain this, Beichen. What is your connection to Etienne? Liu Beichen was taken aback by her accusatory tone. Etienne? I barely know her. Why would you ask such a thing? Anife's laughter was sharp, brittle. Oh, really? My grandfather seems to think otherwise. He claims she has your children. The blood drained from Liu Beichen's face. Children? His mind raced back to a time 6 years ago, a whirlwind romance, a woman with eyes like the deepest ocean could it be? Meanwhile, back in Etienne's apartment, the tension hung heavy in the air. The grandfather, satisfied with his discovery, rose to leave. Come, Misson. We have much to discuss. He extended a hand towards her. Etienne hesitated, her eyes darting to her children playing in the next room. Joer looked up, his bright eyes meeting hers. Mummy, he called out, his voice filled with childish innocence, Daddy and Mummy are Bing. The word, a childish mispronunciation of best, pierced through the tense atmosphere. The grandfather froze, his eyes widening in realization. He looked from Etienne to the children, then back again. The pieces of the puzzle clicked into place. Bing, he repeated, his voice barely a whisper. They call you Mummy. The arrival of Liu Beichen and a group of his friends, alerted by the grandfather's urgent summons, interrupted the stunned silence. The room became a chaotic mix of voices and emotions. Anife, her face contorted with fury, confronted Etienne. Accusations flew, denials were made, and the truth, like a fragile butterfly trapped in a storm, threatened to be lost in the chaos. Then, Liu Beichen's eyes met Etienne's. 6 years melted away, and he saw not the struggling single mother, but the vibrant, passionate woman he had once loved. He saw it in her eyes, the same depth, the same fire, and he saw it in the faces of her children. The resemblance was undeniable. "They're mine," he said, his voice low but firm, cutting through the noise. He turned to Anife, his gaze unwavering. "Our engagement is over." The air crackled with the shock of his declaration. Anife gasped, her face pale. The others stared in stunned silence. Liu Beichen walked towards Etienne, his heart pounding in his chest. He reached out, his hand gently cupping her cheek. "It's you," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "It's always been you." And Etienne's tears flowed freely now, a mixture of relief, joy, and a touch of lingering pain. "Yes," she whispered back, her voice choked with emotion. He gathered her and the children into his arms, a silent promise of a future they had almost lost. "This is my private number," he murmured, pressing a card into her hand, a subtle gesture of protection and care. "If you need anything, please feel free to do so." The words, simple yet profound, echoed in the quiet aftermath of the storm, a beacon of hope in the uncertain dawn of their new beginning.